All right, good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Everyone.
Before I leave, and I'll send you the details.
All right, good morning. Thanks for your patience. We're now at quorum, so we can get the meeting started. First off, happy June, Thursday. We'll get the meeting started just now. Can we start with a roll call, actually? CB1. Here we go. Tammy's finished. CB2.
Present.
CB3.
Present.
CB4. CB5. CB6.
Present.
CB7.
Present.
CB8.
Present.
CB9.
Present.
CB10.
Present.
CB11.
Present.
And CB12. I think this is about a clock out, so almost there. Thank you to everyone for being here. Thank you to our council member staff as well who are present here. I just want to introduce themselves very quickly.
Morning, everyone. The Annabelle Council of Governor's Office.
Hi, I'm Jackie Simmons from Council of the Board Office.
Francisco Blanco from Councilor Brayala's office.
All right, can I get an adoption of today's meeting agenda, please?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Move over also to the approval of the May 16th Borough Board meeting minutes. Motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you so much. We can now move on to the Borough President report. Okay, President.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Great to see all of you here for a meeting with a very big topic. Doesn't get any bigger than this. Excuse me. I don't think in my time as a member of the Borough Board, I've now been in one capacity or another coming to these meetings for 10+ years. I don't think we've taken on a bigger issue than this. And probably none of us will in our time in government. Very exciting. Have you talked yet about kind of the mechanics of voting and all that? Not so much. Okay, so I do want to talk a little bit about this housing plan, but just in terms of our mechanics here today, I know that a number of you and a number of boards are not quite through your own process and would not be prepared to vote today. So what we want to talk about, which I'll let Eric address in a few minutes, is the possibility of reconvening at a later date to do the actual vote. Even though I think today serves as a really important time to discuss, but we have experts here from CPC and we can dive into some of the issues that all of us have. We're really shooting to get this done ahead of the CPC hearing on July 10th, so scheduling a bit of a challenge. I'll let Eric talk about that, but nonetheless, we've been following your proceedings, your hearings, your committees on this. There's been at least someone from my office at every single meeting, committee and general for every board for months. Yes, that is as exhausting as it sounds for them, but we have taken notes, we've analyzed, we've listened, we've internalized your debates on this. And I have to say, on the whole, I am quite heartened by the extent to which, certainly compared to the last big debate I was involved in, which was mandatory inclusionary housing, we're seeing I feel a much more nuanced discussion in which the crisis that looms over us of lack of affordability in housing is ever present, and we've had divergent views on how to deal with that, but I'm gratified that so many of you and so many of your boards are committed to that mission to get the housing that the city needs built. But there are challenges in your discussions, and there's challenges on this issue. There's a huge contradiction at the heart of housing policy in New York City, which is that in the abstract, almost everyone believes we need to create more housing. But in practice, generally what they mean is they want more housing everywhere except their own neighborhood. And this plan is built on that contradiction. It's built to deal with it by putting forth a set of policies that will add a little more housing to every neighborhood in the city, so that no one can feel singled out, so that we don't repeat the patterns of the past in which a few neighborhoods, many of which were, by the way, in Manhattan, got most of the housing, so that we don't repeat the pattern of less wealthy neighborhoods and neighborhoods of color getting most of the upzonings. This is a plan with equity built in from day one. But therein also lies the biggest challenge, because I've been watching the debates in other parts of the city as well. And what you're finding is that generally people like the plan overall, except the one component that most impacts their neighborhood. So there are parts of the city that they're okay with universal affordability pricing. They might even like it. They just don't want accessory dwelling units to be legalized. Or they're okay with ADUs being legalized. They just don't want more apartment buildings on top of single-story retail and commercial districts. Or they're okay with that provision, but they don't want the parking minimums lifted in their neighborhood. Or they're okay with parking minimums being lifted, but they don't want UAP in their neighborhood. We're seeing this repeated, the same pattern. That will kill this policy. If that is the way this plays out in community boards and the city council politically, that kills it. Because no one wants to feel like they're the only neighborhood being asked to do something tough. The way this works is if everybody sees the big picture and realizes, you know what, there's 100,000 units on the line. And there's some challenges in my neighborhood. I'm going to try and make this policy better in every way I can for my community. But at the end of the day, every neighborhood's got to step up. That is the winning view that will get this passed, with the stakes being impossibly high. I have spoken to a lot of people who don't accept this premise. And they generally come back to me with a couple of arguments, which I want to directly talk about. One, and this is surprising to me, they say we're not actually in a housing crisis. And I've concluded that we're drowning in statistics on this, and it can become easy for people to sort of pick out whatever stats they want. And you don't actually have to look at the vacancy rate. It's true, it's 1.4%. It's the lowest in a half century. You don't actually have to look at the portion of families who are rent burdened. It is over 50%. That's pretty bad. You don't have to look at the pace of production. It has plummeted. A little bit of a moving target, that number, but I think we all agree that it's down. You don't have to track employment. It is true, though, in the last decade, we've added a lot more jobs than we've added housing. If you want to know whether we are in a crisis, all you have to do is look at one thing. What does it cost to rent or buy an apartment in your neighborhood? You need to know that number. And I'm obsessed with that number, or those numbers. And I certainly know them Manhattan-wide. And for rentals, for market rate rentals, the average now in Manhattan is $5,000. And if you want to look specifically at 2 bedrooms, more like 6,500. You want to look at 3 bedrooms, more like 9,000. That is the current rental market in the borough of Manhattan. And in some of your neighborhoods, by the way, it's a lot more than that. You should know that. I hope you know those numbers. Some people say, well, okay, it's high interest rates, it's weird time, maybe it's better economics to buy. Well, the current median sale price for an apartment listing in the borough of Manhattan is 1.6 million. This is what we are dealing with. And so what you have to ask yourself when you're determining whether we're in a housing crisis is, do those rental and sales numbers work for the people that you are serving? Do they work for your constituents? Simple yes or no question. That's the only number you got to look at. Forget the vacancy rates and employment creation and all that stuff. You just need to know whether the market is currently working for your folks. And also hear from people say, You know, there's too many problems with this kind of. Zoning change that's mostly focused on private property and mostly focused on private developers. We just need the city to create more 100% affordable housing. I am all in on that fight. I mean, that is my #1 priority in my political life, to get more affordable housing built. But we have a couple problems there. You know, the city was abandoned. Thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of properties were abandoned in the city in the 60s and 70s, and maybe the 80s. And it was very bad for New York, but something good came out of it. The city ended up owning those properties. And over the last 30 or 40 years, we've been pushing them out as affordable housing. That's almost done. You know your communities, there are very few vacant or abandoned properties left owned by the city. And the few that are remaining have some plan that may not have been executed yet, but it's not like no one thought to go build housing on the large abandoned lot in the middle of your community board. Secondly, talking about 100,000 apartments potentially created in this plan. What's the cost of that? You know, we're seeing now average costs for affordable units at about $750,000 to build these. But that's when you're giving the developer the land for free. And as I just mentioned, that's almost done, right? So if you assume people have to buy the land to then build, you're really talking more like 1 million unit. And there's some affordable housing projects, if they're really nice, that are already at about 1 million unit before they're paying for the loan. So to build 100,000 apartments, right? That's what zoning that we're considering here today would enable. You want to do it on the public dime, that's $100 billion. Anyone know what the HPD capital budget is in a given year? Let's call it 2 to 3 billion. Right, so there is no funding that 100 billion in the HPD capital budget. That's not how it works. And if you think the federal government is coming to our rescue, sorry, delusional. We have no choice but finding a way to build housing on private property and affordable housing on private property. No choice. In addition to continuing to do everything we can to ramp up the HPD production, which we must do because it's a critical component of the solution. I also hear people say, okay, fine, but we don't need market rate housing. The first apartment I ever rented as a solo tenant, as a grown-up, when I was a brand new teacher in the New York City Public Schools, was a lovely, airy, high-ceiling studio, good-sized studio in Fort Greene, Brooklyn. Anyone want to guess what I paid for that market rate apartment? $550. Okay? I could afford that, even though as a new teacher, I was making $26,000. Okay. I just went to the local listing and found a market rate apartment, and it was in Fort Greene, and it got a lot of light, and I rented it. Right? That is how the housing market is supposed to work. And it is not how it is currently working, because there's such a shortage. We're getting bidding wars on rental apartments in New York City. There were no bidding wars on that apartment in Fort Greene. There are bidding wars today. And my question to anyone is, well, how do we get those market rate rents down? What's the strategy? How do we get those down? Because this is not going to work unless we do. We're getting, when we open affordable buildings, we are getting an average of 250 applications per apartment. Okay, so where are the other 249 people going to go? There's no choice but to get control of market rate rents. And I don't know any other way to do that than making the laws of supply and demand work in our favor. So for all those reasons, we need these 100,000 apartments. And we need them in every neighborhood, we need them in the borough of Manhattan. And as you're discussing this proposal today, of course, we're going to get into the nitty-gritty. This is complicated. And I know even at this late game, there's a lot of questions. Also, by the way, a lot of misinformation. And so we have experts here from DCP to help us sort through that. So this would be a good use of time today. But I don't want you to lose sight of the mission here, which is to solve this crisis. And as you are debating the minutia, think about that one thing I asked you to focus on. What does it cost to get an apartment in your neighborhood? And if you're not okay with that current cost, then find a way to do something tough. And make this a plan that doesn't just add more housing everywhere, but which your neighborhood is contributing to the success. All right. Thank you very, very much for hearing me out. I'm excited for this conversation. I'm going to turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. I just wanted to add, as Mark already said, you know, a lot of folks at CAU and from land use have been in your meeting, so I just wanted to give a shout out to Lizette and who's our director of land use, and Celeste and Ellen, who have been attending all these meetings.
Let's give them a big round of applause.
And I also want to give a shout out and thank you to TCC for being here, for being able to address any questions that may come up in our conversation. So yeah, I think before we get into the conversation about whether or not we're prepared to vote, we do still have a public hearing session. And I think it's important that we get through that portion first. So if it's okay with everyone, I just want to see if there's any member of the public that's here to issue comments. Either in person or on Zoom. I don't see any hands up in the attendees, so we'll leave that portion open, but I just wanted to make sure that we got public comment for our public hearing, which was, notice was given early and in advance. All right, so I guess to the next portion, as the borough president said, because it seems that not all of our boards are prepared to vote on all the measures, I just wanted to have a conversation about where boards are at. You mentioned we do have DCP here to go through clarity, and I think it's important for us to at least review the proposals and get comments. That way we can be better informed for a vote before the DCP vote, which correct me if I'm wrong, but that's July 10th.
It's the hearing, the
The
vote.
hearing, sorry, the hearing is July. So we want to make sure that we get our comments in before that hearing. So is there any board that wants to share any concerns about where they're at in terms of being able to participate today? Yeah.
I mean, at least for CB5, our full board meeting is gonna be July 11th, so we wouldn't be able to vote until after that, which is again after the hearing. We thought the hearing was gonna be 2 weeks later on the 24th or whatever it would be, 23rd, I guess. But so we're considering, you know, taking emergency action at our executive committee meeting to weigh in at the DCP hearing, but yeah, as of right now, you know, our full board would not vote on it until July 11th.
Thank you.
So we had our land use meeting on Tuesday night and we'll be voting next week. So we'll be ready for our game.
Thank you.
CB11 also had our land use meeting and has not yet had executive report, but we'll have it.
It's listed on the agenda for this.
That's great.
That's
Executive is this Thursday and full board is next Tuesday.
So CB10 has its third public hearing tonight at Rural College, if anyone wishes to attend. We actually want to give thanks to DCP, who has been at every one of we've done land use and housing meetings since this has come to our attention, and they've been at every meeting. Sometimes doing redundant work, but still doing the work. There are some comments from Chair Harrison. I don't know if this is the time to share them with respect to CB10's concern, or we can wait. We vote next Wednesday as well.
Yeah, we are expecting a resolution at our July meeting. Fortunately, our July meeting is the same day as Borough Board, so we, you know, unless we may have to do something as like a special meeting to go into vote in July.
So we vote in committee in our July meeting, which is the 8th. So I'd be ready with the advisory vote in July, but definitely not today. we could try and do some kind of emergency exec in between, but I have, in the course of my term as chairmanship, on less than a handful of times, seen anything that came out of land use not supported. So I feel comfortable once we have our land use committee voting at Borough Board in July. Not today.
So general board meetings tonight, so we be voting tonight.
CB3 is in a similar position as CB5. We're voting next month, but I don't know if we'll be ready before the hearing. But I think I'm a similar position as Tammy in CB1, that I think that our full board will vote similar.
And your lands committee is still after.
Yeah, it's on
the
the
hearing.
14th, yeah.
CD6, it's past housing, land use.
CB7 passed, full board on Tuesday.
Well, it seems like we're at about half of our boards, so maybe depending on when special votes happen, but yeah, it looks like maybe half of our boards right now be prepared, it's like maybe just so just one under. So I think probably the best course of action is for us to have a discussion on the proposals in the item, because we want to make sure that we have all the input supports us. So any conversation or question about that?
So, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Would we just talk about it today and then have another meeting?
Yeah,
or a
so-
special meeting?
Yeah, so we have all of
Okay,
these
okay.
proposals here, we can walk through them, we can take notes. Make comments and then we'll work together, I will definitely work today to pass around a couple of things to see what works best for everybody.
So we would do a Borough Board resolution in July.
We do a borough resolution in July. Yeah,
At a special meeting,
and especially,
not at the regular.
it's not at the regular step.
And there's no chance that DCP, who has told all the boards that they would accept comments through September, would push back their hearing date, their public hearing, so that the borough board could do the work that they do, and the community boards who were told that they had more time could fully flesh out and do theirs. It feels a little for something that is, no offense to John, who's been amazing at his time, but this feels like for one of the most transformative city of yes things, that the timing and the structure is very off-putting and pushing, whereas we didn't have this kind of feedback with the last proposal, which was also 18 different sections, like this is 16 different sections. DCP worked with the communities and pushed things back to allow more time, so there wasn't need for emergencies back and forth. I think just the process here is very different than the process from the last zoning text amendment and even the first zoning text amendment. And yet this one is, quote, the most complicated and transformative. So I bring that as a not negative feedback to the people who are trying really hard to get this out in the information, but that the process, when we look around the table at the 12 boards, doesn't seem, and the borough president, who has, advocated beautifully this morning, but now we're talking about special meetings here, there, and everywhere. It seems that the cleanest thing would be if borough board did a resolution asking DCP to delay their public hearing and allow the community boards the time to do the process that they're chartered to do.
I appreciate your comments. I will say, we have been communicating for the last few months that our intention was to get borough board resolution before the hearing. That's what we've been sharing with all the boards for the last few months. It does seem like even with us making this push to still have a special meeting beforehand, that a majority of our boards will still be able to participate in that. And, a lot of you have already done the work of it, and we appreciate that. And I think our intention is to maybe move forward with a special meeting or essentially move up our July meeting, whichever makes the most sense.
John, do you wanna weigh in on any of that?
But yeah,
I'm substance guy, not process guy. Really, Danielle, do you have anything that you wanna say here? We're
Yeah.
reporting it back, right?
We communicated to the public, meeting community boards, elected officials, you know, that's our hearing date, and that's when the commission is gonna have a hearing on this. We will take any comment from a community board, an elected official, the borough board, anyone, at any point in the process, and if it's after our process, we'll pass it on to the city council, but we will. Can I just, where are the other boroughs on this? I mean, are we the only borough that's having this issue in terms of getting new? The Bronx Borough Board is meeting at the end of the month, so the 29th, I think is the date, if that's Friday, the 28th and 29th. And then, the, Brooklyn Borough Board is meeting in early July, I believe. The Staten Island Borough Board did not take this up, the Queens Borough Board did not.
They didn't take it up at all.
They had discussion on it, but they didn't issue a presentation.
Wow. Wow.
which is what we're trying to avoid.
Wow.
That's what we're trying to avoid.
Yeah, yes, thank you.
Our board felt, again, the crunch of having to review so much information in such a short period of time. But what we've sort of taken as a course of action is that now that we do have a full board resolution, we will be following up with letters that go deeper in certain areas where people feel they just haven't had the opportunity to do that. And our practice has always been that if there's a resolution in place, letters may follow that address consistent with the resolution. So that is what we expect.
So if it's all right, does that mean we can move forward with going through these proposals now? We want to make sure that we get your feedback on this and then we can revisit this for our special meeting.
Jonathan.
Yeah.
I mean, John and or Danielle, you're here to help us.
On something, yeah.
But do one of you, one or both of you want to join the table? Or are you happy, other this side?
Yeah, is there another,
Can we have a couple more minutes?
Yeah.
Make sure you.
we're welcome.
So
We're welcome here.
should I have phrased my question, my comment more as a question that I asked? If we would pass a resolution at borough board asking for more time, or is that not what we do? Just a process question, and may I please have a copy of the draft?
Yeah, I can pass this copy over to you. It's a matter of process. Our intention is to move forward with this for. I'm getting more copies, but I think we're gonna start moving into conversation and discussion on each proposal. So.
Would we have this discussion again once for those of us who don't have positions from our board?
Absolutely, yeah. When we go through the vote, you will still be able to weigh in with amendments and.
We also welcome them ahead of whatever meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can have a. We'll have to do that ahead of time.
Right, that is also helpful, and I think we made that suggestion as well. We haven't received anything to start anything, if there's anything between now and that meeting, you can also send that in. I'll throw up. Full copy of it.
I actually was trying to wait and thank you. Oh, no, do you have copies?
Yeah. Thank you, Coco.
I can actually.
I have one, I have Eric's, I have Eric's. Eric.
The one is one.
You have to copies.
So.
Thank you.
I have. That's motion. So. Eric,
Yes.
if at the end of this, there's not enough of us who can actually weigh in. Is it a bad thing to make a motion, which I would like to do, to request DCP to push back? So that we could conduct the normal course of business? They did it the last time at the zoning text amendment for business. I'm confused as to why we don't have that opportunity this time. And so I was trying to make a motion so we could full throttledly have a conversation that represents each of the boards. And I know it's very unusual to do that here, to make a motion like that, but I think hearing DCP say, well, we've announced it and we've said it, and I get that, but it was different last time. And so I don't understand why we can't, we wanna get this right, we wanna get everybody to be able to support it the best that we possibly can. And it's a long-term permanent change, so if we could push back the business sitting of yes for commercial opportunities, why can't we push back on DCP and the hearing be moved for this?
Based on the comments that we've heard, most boards will have, correct me if I'm wrong, pretty much all the borough boards will come in before the hearing, is that right, John? Or we did?
It sounds like the information you were taking down at this meeting. Indicates that.
If you are insistent on putting a motion forward, we'll follow Robert's rules of order, and, you know, it takes a little bit of time away from the substance discussion, but I don't think we should fool ourselves to think they're gonna move the hearing date because of the total on that resolution here, but, you know, if you're insistent, Tammy, we'll follow Robert's rules and go through it, but let's make it quick, because we got very important topics to discuss here.
I'm just uncomfortable because I can't, like, I could give you my personal opinion, but that's not what I'm here for. I don't have anything from
Okay,
my
well,
board that-
hopefully you'll have more when we reconvene, and if not, then the public gets your input, city council gets your input if you weigh in about September.
Do we need someone to second the motion?
Yourself.
Sorry, can someone restate the motion?
The motion was simply to ask DCP to push back the public hearing to allow all the community boards the time to do their process in the month of July.
Second that.
Second, should we go to a roll call vote, make sure we have the motion? All right. CB1,
Yes.
CB2? Yes. CB3,
Yes.
CB4 is not here. CB5,
Yes.
CB6,
Oh, abstain.
CB7,
Abstain.
CB8,
Yes.
CB9,
Yes.
CB10,
Yes.
CB11, CB12,
Yes.
yeses, 3 abstentions. So 8-0 to. So we will ask DCP to. To.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you.
so we'll make changes.
Oh.
Sorry, yes, I apologize. We do have council policies here, I apologize for that. Any abstentions? What's office?
I'm abstaining.
And Mark as well.
Abstain.
What is the current vote?
Yeah. So we have 8 yeses, 0 no's, 7 abstentions.
Has the voting closed?
The voting is not closed.
Can I change my vote to abstain?
Okay, 7 yeses.
Does the vote stay open for other council people?
Okay, so we are at 7 yeses, 0 nos, and 8 abstentions now. It does not pass.
Yeah, because the kind of abstentions on.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I was gonna say, on the draft, right, so.
Yes, I think we're ready to talk about the topic now.
Just like process wise, because I'm like, I'm not sure where everyone's at in terms of like which ones are put forward. Is the intention of this draft, like, since it's split by the comments of just kind of listing, you know, pulling from everybody's resos, what any changes under each. I guess I'm trying to think about like how are we organizing this? Because I know for a fact, like there's well, until next week, we'll see. But there's only 3 proposals that our board isn't supporting as it's currently drafted. So I'm just trying to understand, like, how do we want to work through any like contentions, right? Because for us, that's student in the 1-bedroom. There might be other boards here who love the student in the 1-bedroom proposal, so I'm just trying to understand. Is the focus of our comment would be like changes we want to see versus like the notes? So I know like what language to get. That makes sense.
So I think we want to hear the substantive like amendments that you may have. We try to not keep it hyper local. So, you know, where something may be specific to, we in our meeting voted to not have it on this particular avenue or this certain area. But other than that, we're open to listening to what commentary you have. We'll walk through all of it. Yes, Sam.
Our board didn't break it down this way, so we don't have specific comments on each of these issues. It was, our comments were more general. So I feel a little uncomfortable trying to, you know, pull out from our resolution how we felt on each of these things, because we voted an overall position and then said we'd like to see these addressed. Which seemed like a, you know, it's a huge document. Not everything that we had a concern with is listed in here. So I'm wondering if maybe that's a better direction to go rather than to try to split out each of these issues. You know, there's not, there could be thousands of individual items that we would be asking to vote on versus, I don't know, right now we have like 10.
I think the other part to that too is if there are any individual items that come up as we go through the proposals, we still will take note and any commentary if you take it back between now and special meeting.
It's just, we don't want to rehash, you know, 14, 15 issues. We came up with a, you know, general, we understood that our response to city planning is either, you know, it's for conditional, against. And it wasn't divided out the way that the city of economics was. So we approached it from that.
Do you know how the other boroughs handled that? Or Danielle?
I don't. Danielle, do you know how other boroughs handle?
The other boroughs have not, voted on resolutions, yes.
But did community boards generally do sort of a package vote, or did they?
Each
Do-
community board in Manhattan?
No, the other ones, yeah.
I think it's been a varied approach.
So they're all gonna confront it.
You know, I'll just emphasize, we're looking for those details so we can incorporate the changes.
Yeah, I can say for you'll remember the 18 components from EO. We took all the data, the feedback from community boards and actually made like bar charts for each component so that we had a pretty textured sense of like how much support there was for individual components. We're trying to do something similar here with the worksheets that many community boards have filled out, and we'll similarly process that data. So I think most boards so far, although it's in process, are, you know, using the worksheet or roughly following that rubric.
Yeah, Sam.
Thank you for the rubric. Actually, it helped us do EO really cleanly. So we are looking for our final meeting to go through the checklist that you gave us. What I don't understand necessarily, and perhaps you can answer here, is where are the factors that seem to be that fall in between all of the buckets that you've given us? Because you know, we asked about process and changes as to where things are. I didn't see that on the buckets. And that was a concern that was raised, so I don't know if you can change your bucket because it affects more than just one aspect of it on process serve, and that's.
Right, yeah, there are details that fall beyond the
Correct.
major and medium-sized components. And so we're hoping that community boards can provide any feedback on the other or additional measures as well. You're correct that your community board has talked a lot about some that fall outside of that, and we'll absolutely, take those into consideration as well.
Would you make a category at the end of your bucket list? That gives place to opine, to have it be as clean and clear as possible.
Just to clarify, and you can take any approach you would like to take, but the end of the worksheet talks about other district fixes, and we intended to get that feedback there. But if folks want to give the feedback in any other way, we'll take that as well, but that's how we contemplated it. We talked about the railroad right away, other than in that part.
My question is, at the end of the worksheet, is there here are the general, much like John's been at our meeting and.
Yeah.
And we've talked about, are they detailed and listed at the end?
They are not detailed unless we can help you with that, and we can assist in any way
That
that you would like us to.
I think for transparency
Yep.
and engagement,
Yeah.
it would be great to have those listed there.
Totally makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
Great. I think with that, are we, yeah.
Just really quick, to CB1's point, I think that if there was a bucket of the shared housing with the single unit housing, I think our board might have voted differently if, those two things were separated. And just a quick note on the EO City of Yes, that I think when the changes were made, it was hard for us to parse through what the changes actually were, so a summary of that would have been.
A summary of the modifications, the commission and the council.
Yes,
I can send that right now.
Thank you.
If you'd like me to. I'll share with the VP staff.
Thank you.
All right, so I think, all that being said, can we move into the first proposal and conversation? So does everybody have a copy of it? So happy to hear comment or discussion on proposal one.
Yes, one of the proposals that does not impact me.
Yes, it is. And I'm happy to read it out too, Alex, just for brevity's sake. I know everyone has it, so. Yeah,
We lump these things together, some of which actually do apply to Manhattan, even though they were listed as for the low density areas of the city. But our caveat on the grouping was that subject to surfacing of the specific concerns of other community boards outside of Manhattan. We didn't object, but that those were critical to DCP to take into consideration.
and did you bundle those together or did you go?
I'm gonna have to.
Yeah, okay.
We didn't follow it.
So, with proposal one, again, this is, the one on residential density in town centers outside of Manhattan. Any comment or shall we move to the next one?
We were basically in favor of it.
We'll move over to proposal two, which I feel proposal 2 through 4 will all kind of be in the same wheelhouse, but, again, we do this, development of small apartment buildings, lower density areas, close to public transit, is located outside of Manhattan.
We were in it.
Okay, we're guys are already.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we were in favor of that.
We were.
Great. Moving to 3. This is AU, but specific to rear yard area and not feasible in Manhattan, so.
We had some real concerns about the rear yard area item, which does apply in Manhattan, although it was originally intended significantly for the outer boroughs. Because first of all, we're a very dense district. Secondly, many of our blocks have a donut, as we call it, in the middle. And it's a very different thing when you have essentially a street wall that's fully built. lot line to lot line, on the sides to extend, your building further, that does impact the light and the, air of adjacent properties. So I think what we have isolated is that certainly in a high land value, high density district like ours, we do not approve of the extension from 30 feet to 20 down the rear yard because it impacts these donuts that are of value, and a characteristic of our district.
Thank you.
City six had exactly the same concern that that, you know, affects our quality of light and air in so many areas.
Yeah, we have the same, this is particularly true in historic districts, which have that kind of, that interior type of space that is critical for all people who are living in the back of the buildings, because that's where their light and air comes from. And it has a significant impact on them. It's not visible the way it is in a more suburban layout of housing. So it does have to be taken into account.
We also have donuts in our neighborhood from the original buildings that were built, long times ago. So the three largest complexes in our neighborhood, which include Gateway Plaza, Independence Plaza, and Southbridge Towers, all are applicable in this kind of a thing because they all have the donuts. There are some backyards in CB1 in the historic area with a lot of the townhouses and things, so it does have some applicability, and concerns were raised, although we have not voted on it, and John spent a lot of quality time with us last month, so.
I have a question, I guess, for my fellow chairs. When there are concerns about the donut and, the rear yard requirements, are the concerns that people would like do like a renovation and expand it out, or is the concern about if someone is to demo and rebuild, then that donut gets smaller?
We have a proposal before us that the donut disappears for a new sliver tower. So that is the thing.
I would say it's both issues, absolutely, but I mean, many people renovate, extend in the back.
I think the concern in our board was also that, any expansion of a townhouse in our district is highly unlikely to yield any additional housing of any affordability. These are typically homeowner or landlord extensions of somebody's current unit.
Just to expand on that, we wouldn't want that to be as of right. If you would have to come to us and get it. So that's really the issue here. In our estimation is as of right versus having to come to community board or, go through the process and get an approval for a one-off of that nature in Manhattan. But we also looked at it from the point of view of the other boroughs as well. And there was a lot of, we were absolutely no on this. So that was our vote. But in the other boroughs, there was a feeling of people who bought into a neighborhood with a rear yard. And now all of a sudden their neighbors have 10 people living in their backyard. That wasn't what they bought into. So that was a concern just from the expectations of people who live in those neighborhoods.
John, do you have any technical clarifications, particularly on the Manhattan angle?
Sure, so this is an issue that we looked at, in the higher density districts, specifically with respect to the donut. No rear yard ADUs, either attached or detached in the donut at all. And I think that was some of the concerns that we heard from CB7, for instance, that you would have the permitted obstructions for rear yard ADUs in the donut. ADUs in a rear yard require access to the street for FDNY reasons, and I understand that's not clear from the zoning. This is a fire code issue. And so anytime you have a donut in a medium or higher density area, you would not be able to stick an ADU either attached or detached in the rear yard. We also looked at expansions into the rear yard. You know, there are townhouses with donuts that are 45 feet today that would have the ability to expand to the rear yard. When we looked at the construction expenses involved in bumping 10 feet out to the rear yard above, you know, something that's anything more significant than a solarium or whatever. We found that existing depth of unit requirements interfere with that as well. If you have a 60-foot townhouse that you wanna bump out again, you run into that 30-foot window. You can't have portions of a room that are more than 30 feet from a window that interfered in that type of situation. So a combination of regulatory issues and also cost issues involved with a new foundation in order to go above a single story. We found that it would be extremely unusual and for this reduction in rear yard to result in enlargements into the rear yard as well. And there's one more thing. The reason why the 20-foot rear yard is extended into the medium and high density districts is like we went over this with CB1 fairly extensively. Is because the 30-foot rear yard requirement, which dates to 61, along with the 30-foot minimum court dimension, along with the 30-foot window to lot line requirement, along with the 70% lot coverage maximum, basically has forced all new construction into these bar buildings with a double loaded corridor, with apartments that only have exposure on one side in a way that interferes with the ability to produce family size units and actually reduces light and air relative to older style construction that we've seen. I live in Hillman houses in CB3. You know, it was built as basically affordable housing in the 1950s for union workers. My kitchen has a window, my bathroom has a window. Those 30-foot is like the basic dimension have rendered that impossible in new construction. And so going from 20 to 30 ironically reduced light and air access to apartments. And so the reduction to 20% is actually part of a suite of changes intended to improve light and air for new construction. This isn't really row house, these aren't provisions that we expect to see in row house districts, but when new apartment buildings are built elsewhere, that's what this is for.
Just one more question, Krim, then we get to, sorry. I think I've heard you talk about what a big slice of the total potential housing production that this one provision is, not because of Manhattan, where for reasons you explained, we expect very, very few cases. But I think I heard you give a statistic that even if only 2% of the eligible lots in the outer boroughs, it yields some huge number. What's at stake here?
Yeah, for accessory dwelling units, are you talking about? Yeah, this is part of the 20-foot is part of an effort to try to make those workable. And we are looking at tens of thousands of additional units from the ADU program. It's not as much of a workhorse as UAP, for instance, but in low density districts, the ADU proposal is very significant.
And what does a backyard apartment like that rent for in some parts of Queens or something?
I mean, obviously, there are a lot of market factors that depends on looking to other jurisdictions, like California that have legalized it, jurisdictions in Connecticut. It absolutely does provide housing at a price point that does not exist in single family and two family areas today. So we see the ADUs as a really crucial part of creating new typologies that serve a broader range of households and families in low density districts, which have been doing a bad job of that recently in the last few decades.
She was
Oh, sorry, and I want to be really clear, this is not about ADUs in our district. We know ADUs are probably not going to happen in Manhattan. But, and you talked about the cost, we get people who buy an entire townhouse and decide they want to extend it. They don't have a construction cost. It's not an issue. They're gonna extend it, absolutely.
Yeah, I think we saw with the 45-foot townhouses that could expand today, they have room to go. If you have one that's already bumping, it's like 60 feet deep and it's already bumping up against the yard requirements today. That's something that we would not expect because of that distance from a window, depth of room.
And, lots of people unfortunately build rooms without windows and they're.
No, this is good feedback.
Absolutely, it's going to happen. There's no better.
Can I?
Yeah.
Is there any way to make this more surgical? so that it does not impact what you don't intend it to impact? That's
That's
the
good
question.
feedback, that's great
That's the
feedback.
question.
I
Because that's really where you're hearing this come from. We don't object to ADUs either, you know. We know they are not gonna exist.
good feedback.
I'd also like to say, we don't want to have to weigh in, it should just not be allowed, because that implies this sort of, you know, oh, you're okay, you're not okay. We just don't want it to happen, it should be across the board.
My question was, in terms of the, you know, the uses outside of Borough of Manhattan. Is there any analysis of what the cost would be to convert some of these garages or whatever you're talking about to actual housing? Like, what would the homeowner have to spend in terms of minimum upgrades to those units?
That's a great question. We don't have cost estimates at city planning that goes a little bit beyond our areas of expertise, but we can say that it happens in other jurisdictions, and it's part of. The suite of changes there to try to enable a range of topologies. Basement units, attic units, attached rear yard, detached above a garage, replacement of a garage, things like that. And so if we enable it, some people will be able to do it.
Well, I mean, if you are saying that if this passes, that this will be a significant portion of the units that would be permitted, there must be some analysis as to what's gonna be entailed in order to do this. I mean, is the city then gonna provide programs for homeowners to promote these changes? Because I would think there would have to be, I mean, we're talking about this before, there are actually people living in those garages now with no insulation, et cetera, et cetera. So to bring them up to code, I mean, if we're saying that, you know, this is gonna result in more units, then I think there should be some level in the analysis that shows how much it will cost to convert these things.
I mean, you're talking about legalization efforts as well, which is on somewhat of a separate track, and there is state legislation there as well as city efforts in order to support that. We're talking about prospective, you know, newly constructed ADUs of the various types I mentioned. You know,
Oh, okay, so
again,
not conversions, then just-
again, based on, what we see from other jurisdictions. Owners who need money or need space will do that opportunistically. It's not feasible on every site, but it is feasible on some sites. HPD has piloted a loan program for like lower income homeowners who might want to do this. And then the state has at least authorized a tax benefit for ADUs. We need to do more work in the local, at the local level in order to actually implement it. But a exemption for additional value created by ADUs from property taxes in a way that would also render a number of these units feasible on the margin. So not every single family or two family home can do it. But we expect, you know, some portion of folks who need the money or need the space to take the plunge.
Thank you everyone for that. We're ready to move on to proposal 4. So proposal 4 allows 1 and 2 family homeowners to adapt their home, bring existing homes in compliance with zoning outside of Manhattan. Any question or commentary on that one? Pretty strict. Okay. We'll move over to proposal 5 then. So proposal 5 establishes UAP. I think this is something, Mark, do you wanna?
Do I want to say anything?
Yeah, I know you're ready.
Well, I mostly want to hear from the board members, but I guess I'll make one point, which is that MIH in some respects has been very successful. It has added affordable housing in the city without it impacting the city budget, so that we can use our money to go build affordable housing on city-owned sites. There's just one problem, which only a tiny sliver of the borough is currently mapped for MIH. And I think the number of units we've gotten in Manhattan is 800 total. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong, affordable units from MIH. And that only about 2% of the lots here are mapped for MIH. So great program, but not going to solve the housing crisis. But I think the idea of UAP is let's take that success and just make that the default everywhere. And then you start to get real numbers. And I think some DCP did an analysis that if it had been in place for the last decade or maybe 15 years, that you would have gotten 14,000 affordable apartments or
20,000 additional
20,000 additional
since
apartments.
2014,
Right.
UAP had been in place.
Which probably dwarfs the number of affordable housing that all of us have collectively brought into our community boards over that decade. Right, think about all those fights, all that effort, all that money spent in some cases. And that would have been 20,000 affordable units that wouldn't have taken public money away from other providers. So this is a big deal. This is definitely the hardest one politically in Manhattan. I don't minimize that. And I'm anxious to hear your discussion on it, but I think my role here is to remind people of the stakes.
I think Community Board 11 was really pleased with this specific item because it was the component that had affordability. And I think the only, one of the only. I think there was conversation, we were in support, but there was conversation about, you know, when you have an upzoning, there's a community benefits agreement, you get something out of it. And that, you know, that doesn't necessarily happen in this process, that the way we're doing it. So just considering what communities might also need as things are upzoned in that way.
Strauss?
No, so note from, I have notes on 3 areas from our land use committee chair and also the chair. It says, we strongly believe that the UAP requirement should mandate a higher percentage of affordability, 30% and a lower average area median income threshold of 40 instead of the proposed 60.
We would agree.
Sam?
So I have a question for CP11. Are you saying that you wish the zoning text included required community benefits?
We haven't voted on it, so that was just something that came up in conversation, was that when we were rezoned in 2017, there was a series of points of agreements that were committed to our neighborhood. And then, you know, this is essentially allowing density increase without those benefits.
And did DCP respond about that?
I'm not sure we were clear in our meeting necessarily enough for DCP to help respond, but.
Yeah, I think this is something that we've heard. The implication is folks are worried that UAP will obviate the need for future rezonings. I think you're referring to East Harlem corridors, a neighborhood study from 2017. When you do things like that, you're talking about really significant increases in residential capacity. If you're going through ULURP to do a rezoning, you're typically increasing density by 50%, 80%, 100%, 200%. Maybe you're taking a manufacturing district that doesn't allow housing today and newly enabling housing. New York City will absolutely continue to need those types of actions. And when we do them, there will be, you know, MIH first off, and if it's a neighborhood study, neighborhood rezoning, then of course there are the negotiations with the administration and the points of agreements will emerge from that. That won't change. What we're trying to do with UAP is say, in the interim, before we get to any kind of more significant rezoning of a given area, if that would ever happen, we can add a little bit more capacity as long as that's 100% affordable, to make sure that we're getting affordability across all medium and high density districts, and that we don't have to wait for a neighborhood study to happen. Because if we had to wait for a neighborhood study to happen, we wouldn't get to all the city for the next 200 years, right? And so this is just not as significant as a full rezoning, those will continue to be necessary, but a little bit more capacity as long as it's limited to permanently affordable housing. And I think the borough president's right, this really is the workhorse of affordability in this program. We've heard from some CDs, only one, component deals with affordability, but it's the big one. We're talking tens of thousands of income restricted units because of the geography. The secret sauce is the geography, taking a framework that works, but only applies to about 13% of medium and high density districts, and applying it to 100% and letting that existing framework start to produce an order of magnitude more income restricted units at lower AMIs than the current program at an average of 60.
Same thing,
And
and then
so slightly unrelated, but does every rezoning require a community benefit agreement?
I mean, no rezonings require community benefit agreements, and this is something that is beyond the authority and jurisdiction of city planning. That's something that other folks negotiate with, other folks. When you have a neighborhood rezoning like East Harlem did in 2017, typically there are all sorts of negotiations that surround the core land use actions, and I think that's what you're referring to.
Yeah, while we understand the need to move rapidly, and therefore this is not about a formal EULR, there was included in our resolution that we oppose a proposed procedural change to use authorizations for approval of floor area increases, eliminating the requirement for a public hearing and review by elected officials. That's a lesser standard than EULR, but I think it's something that our board felt was important. There's also some substance. We're concerned that replacing voluntary inclusionary housing with UAP may have the unintended effect in our 10 districts and some of the special purpose districts in our area of discouraging developers from participating in the construction of affordable housing. And we asked that BCP and City Council contemplate adjustments to just read this to the UAP program to induce as much affordable housing production as possible in high land use districts, high land cost districts, such as ours, so that we can participate in the goal of furthering fair housing and addressing affordability. Further, we recommend that the UAP scheme be modified to allow for affordable housing credits to be awarded where the developer preserves existing affordable units within the district. The requirement for off-site preservation should be 30% of the host site's FAR. And we further recommend that they consider expanding mandatory inclusionary housing program to developments in high density areas.
Say at the end then.
And CB6 had very similar concerns that just again to quote, does not sufficiently incentivize developers to build income restricted units. So concerned that this is not actually going to be implemented.
Just to reiterate how the framework works, this is a framework that's good, that goes back a couple decades, where in order for multifamily to be feasible multifamily rental, you need the tax benefit. The tax benefit requires affordability. Once you're providing affordability, if you conform that affordable housing to the zoning, then you can also do a bigger building. And so the tax benefit and the zoning work together to create more affordable housing at lower AMIs than would otherwise be possible. So that's the incentive there. We're just kind of putting to rest this like notion that floor area bonus ever drove participation. It never did. It was always and everywhere the tax benefit, which is also crucial to the feasibility of MIH. And so we think that the tax benefit negotiations at the state level ended up in a good place to serve as the engine for creation of a lot of income restricted units through the UAP program as well. So we're excited to again take that framework that already has been producing housing for a couple decades and expanding it dramatically.
Can I ask a direct follow-up question?
Sure.
Is the projections on the affordable housing units, I'm assuming are based on the current tax code, right? The current tax benefits, right? That's you did a survey of.
When we did the little thought experiment that the borough president mentioned, additional 20,000 units, the assumptions there were all the 100% affordable developments that we saw since 2014 would be a little bit bigger, remain 100% affordable. All the mixed income projects would be a little bit bigger, it have the same ratio of affordable to market rate there. And so to your point as well, the way that the structure is proposed and interacts with the tax benefit in high market areas, we expect that it will shift the calculus of what to develop away from condos towards rental. Condos absolutely can participate in UAP, and HPD expects that many of them will, even in the highest density areas. To the extent they don't, then this framework punishes them. It says you can't max out your lot if you don't provide affordable housing. And we think that's a significant improvement over the status quo for people who are kind of wary of market rate condo production in some of the higher value areas that you're talking about here. So we think this will represent a significant improvement towards rentals and toward affordability on sites that don't get that today, especially R10 inclusionary, where we've seen developments recently, 350 units, 400 units with like 15 affordable units or something under the existing R10 inclusionary program. And so I know that we and HPD are extremely excited to be replacing this like R10 bonus ratio from the 1980s with something that actually gets a significant amount of affordability in the highest density, highest value parts of the city.
Can I just say one thing on the AMI question, which a few of you raised? We have a long tradition in the history of housing in the city where we have underemphasized the lower rungs of the income ladder and the housing that we targeted, and that's a huge problem. Partly because it's more expensive to do it, so it's just easier and cheaper to focus on higher AMIs. We've got to correct for that. We definitely need housing at 30%, 40% AMI. But let's just put this in perspective. If you're saying you don't want this to be a borough with 60% AMI housing, you're saying you don't want this to be a borough where a bus driver can live, where a certified nursing assistant can live, not a nurse, because they were way higher, but a certified nursing assistant is way above 30% AMI. A senior cook in the New York City public schools, way above 30% AMI, for a 60% AMI is what they need. An EMS worker, you know, these people are all underpaid. I'm not making that point. I'm just trying to help you understand. Let me finish. I'm just trying to help you understand who you are saying you do not want to live in Manhattan when you say you don't want 60% AMI. Okay, this is not Wall Street bankers. This is there's some doormen which make which make in that range, and certainly supers make in that range. And I think I already said this, but like a lot of Board of Ed employees, not the teachers, a lot of Department of Education employees working in kitchens, working in the HR department, are the people who need 60% AMI housing. So my attitude is we need all of it. We need 30, we need 40, we need 50, we need 60. And honestly, a bus driver doesn't, 60% doesn't even work for a bus driver because they're over income. But just before you reject 60% AMI, understand who you are saying you don't want to be able to afford housing in your neighborhood.
Well, we take them average lot.
Yeah.
Which is
Say
not
more about that.
currently. Which is not currently available, right? So it's not like every single unit under UAP is gonna be 60, they just have to average out.
That's exactly right, Lizette. So today, the voluntary programs create units at 80% AMI and only 80%. We all know what 80%, what AMIs have done in recent years. This drives it down to 60, but even more exciting for us is that it enables income averaging so that we will not get a glut of units at one AMI, but rather get a range. And the way that it interacts with the tax benefit as well ensures that there'll be a range. Also looking at MIH, which allows income averaging. I talked to HPD about this as well. Basically, all projects will have 3 AMIs involved. So you will hit 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90. I expect that to be the range. And UAP maxes out at 100% AMI. You're not allowed to do affordable units higher than that.
So I wanted to say thank you to Mark for saying that, because it's one of the things that we fight for consistently. But where I want to kind of understand in a little bit deeper level is for us, where we've lost more affordable housing than anywhere, we're losing the families, right? So we went from an area that we added all this affordable housing, we opened 3 new schools, we expanded a school in Lower Manhattan. And we had wait lists everywhere because we were very family rich, middle income, right? So 2 working parents, and that's where I'm a little confused as to where the AMI, how that will affect that group that we're looking to drive back into Lower Manhattan to support the schools. They shop local, they support business, they're the ones who stayed, pandemic and actually help rebuild neighborhoods. We saw that post 9/11, post Sandy, post COVID. So where I'm trying to go to is I love where Mark is about the diversity of incomes and people, but how does that work now to affect the larger necessarily apartments that may be needed for families, which will then help our grocery stores and our schools?
Gotcha. So is this specifically about the affordability or more about apartment sizes?
I think it's both, because you can't have, in this conversation, you can't have one without the other. So I'm trying to understand how that meets when you're talking average AMI and size of apartment.
Right, as far as the income restricted units go, we do expect a broader range of AMIs than we create under the existing programs today, 80 and only 80. Tomorrow, 30 to 90, you max out at 100%. AMI, since typically, not exclusively, we also hear this from CB4, I don't know if they're around today. But just wanting to make sure that you're creating units for families that might not quite income qualify at lower AMIs. On the apartment size front, I mentioned this a little bit before, we absolutely are looking to remove some of the unintentional obstacles that we've had in the zoning to family sized units. Again, the fact that we basically mandate bar buildings with only one exposure and mandate daylit corridors in those double loaded, bar buildings such that you can't have family size units turning that corner. So while it's not something we've emphasized because it's not exactly, core to the fair housing or affordability goals, we are removing obstacles to better apartment layouts and 2, 3, 4 bedroom apartments that we used to see pre-61 that we made really difficult in 61 and made really, really difficult with the advent of contextual zoning in the 1980s.
Does the FDNY safety, because every bedroom has to have a window that you can escape out?
Oh, yeah.
How does this meet with that? Because there are, much as you call them, the bar buildings, where people are advertising, you see them all over real estate. This is a bedroom, there's no window in that space.
Oh, golly.
Or people divide living rooms, there's no window. Simply to be able to get to getting more people in. And how do those particular things relate to the AMI? So, averaging AMI is awesome, totally awesome, finally. But how does that average when we're looking at trying to attract the families in? Like, is that gonna be a bump problem if you have 2 working families in the DOE system? 2 working parents to be able to have a family come into these units?
Gotcha. So as far as windowless bedrooms, that's unlawful today. It'll remain unlawful in the future. I know it happens. But part of increasing access to light and air through those apartment layouts is it also increases access for things like egress purposes in terms of fire code. We are working with FDNY on a number of the proposals here and everything would have to comply with fire code, of course. When it comes to the income restricted units, those have bedroom mix requirements still. So at least 50% of income restricted units created through UAP will have to be 2 bedroom or larger. So I know we've had some concerns from some community boards about, are you gonna create too many small and shared units? What about the families? I would say we're trying to remove obstacles for apartments at the full range of sizes, removing obstacles on the low end, but also removing obstacles on the high end, like I mentioned. And then in terms of the income restricted units, absolutely ensuring that you're not exclusively getting affordable 1 bedrooms or affordable studios. You need to have that bedroom mix going forward.
And the max on the second bedroom is 100% AMI under them. Because they're averaging, right? So
UAP units, they have a cap at 100% AMI. So any qualifying affordable housing created through UAP, you would not be able to have an AMI above 100%.
Which I guess my.
It's too low. Is that what you're saying?
For a family, yeah. And that's where I'm trying to understand is how we can take a look at what this housing can do to bring families back to New York, to my district in specific. And to figure out if there's a block at the top, then I'm still not gaining families to grow here. I still don't have a potential for children who grew up in the neighborhoods to come back and live in the neighborhoods as married couples. I'm still losing out to the suburbs.
So let me take a look at the if we're talking about 100% AMI. For a family of 4, we're talking about 155.
Yeah.
So, you know, I don't know if that answers your question or not, but that's not nothing, you know, that's a solid middle and that's a 2-income family. You know, that I think that we're talking about here.
Yes.
I think there was.
150 in this economy, that's like. That's not.
Somebody's putting a job.
That's a professional in income, right? I mean, if we're talking about 2 folks, you know, some of the professions that the borough president mentioned. That's probably 2 incomes.
Well,
Well, I just wanted to echo a little bit of what CB7 was saying, and just to say that we voted against this provision because in our neighborhood, we don't think that this is gonna create any more affordable housing. And it will actually result in additional losses of what we currently have as affordable housing. We've been seeing this for the last 15 to 20 years in our neighborhood, where we've lost tons of walk-up apartments to luxury housing built as of right, with no need for a bonus. And we don't think that this provision will, at least in our neighborhood, create any more affordable housing. And actually in our neighborhood, it will result in our R8B residences actually being able to go up higher, which we're not thrilled about.
Only if there was permanently affordable housing and average.
Yes, I
60%. So
understand
you gotta figure out whether it's not gonna create affordable housing or whether
Right,
it is. I know that extending a inclusionary framework such that every single lot in CB8 would require permanently affordable housing in order to max out. I don't know that there's any way to project a loss of affordable that certainly flies in the face of all of our analysis of UAP. And what the conceivable outcomes of it are. The worst case scenario is that a lot can only does what it can do today already. If you wanna do anything above that at all, it would have to be permanently affordable housing at an average of 60% AMI. So I would push back on the idea that UAP could actually result in a loss of affordable housing. This is the workhorse that's gonna.
You mean a rent regulated building being.
Yes, we've had that all throughout our neighborhood. We've lost so many walk-up buildings with rent-regulated housing. And this program, I know it's a little bit of housing everywhere. We just feel, to be honest with you, it's not bold enough to really create affordable housing and.
How would you change it?
Well, you would have to at least come up with a program that matches the amount of affordable housing you have torn down to build this building. And we need also to reclaim some of the affordable housing we've lost. So anyone who wants to take advantage of a bonus would have to, if we've lost, so many affordable units over the last 10 years, you talk about, how if this program was in place, whatever, then they would have to have some kind of formula to recoup what we've lost, because we'll never get there. And in addition to that, I know you say that this is available to condos, but again, we get, there's not any we don't get any mandated rental housing. And our most recent example, and it's not a 20% bump up, but on 94th Street where, all the R8B was torn down, we're now gonna have like a 420-foot building in an area that was originally zoned for 80 feet. And the best we could get is 100 units of affordable housing at 80% of AMI. It's workforce housing, I'm not saying that, but it went from family apartments to all studios in order to get it.
Let me just say something on this. So it is exceedingly difficult to demolish a rent stabilized apartment and a building. And as I've interrogated this in neighborhoods with reported happenings, it's usually one of 2 things. Either they're buildings which have 6 units or less because they never had rent laws. So that's a different ballgame, right? But those weren't those market rate apartments really are not affordable anymore. Certainly not on the east side. Or these are stories from before 2019. When the law allowed you to buy tenants out and then go through maneuvers to take the units out of regulation. That's gone, right? So it's almost an impossibility. I'm not gonna say it's impossible, but at any rate, if to the extent it is legal, it's legal today already, and you're getting potentially zero affordable units out of it. So now in those exceedingly rare cases, we're gonna get some 60% AMI out of it, so you know, that's a net win, but it's a bit of a boogeyman to say that today in Manhattan. I can't think of any building, rent regulated building that's been demolished in my time as borough president. If someone has one for me, I want to hear. But it's an exceedingly rare, and to not pass a policy, which again, over the last decade would have created 20,000 affordable units. Man, that's a big thing to give up for a very, very narrow case.
Well, it's all of the affordable housing in our neighborhood.
I would say the concerns you're raising are concerns with the status quo that we are addressing with UAP to ensure that inclusionary framework applies everywhere. It's radical expansion of an inclusionary framework everywhere in medium and high density districts to ensure that you don't get what you're talking about in CBA today. And when you do get affordable housing, it's at lower AMIs than the ones.
Okay, and then what happens to the market rate housing in those buildings? Because there's a line of school of thought out there that whatever we're gonna get in affordability for that group, which is only gonna be, 20% or whatever, however many units. Now, every other unit in that building is gonna cost twice as much money for the developer to have a wash or more of a profit.
Yeah, it's like, I hear this line of criticism around like the old 80-20 buildings in particular.
If it's, we're told that at 5 World Trade currently, I mean, Mark knows that was the largest conversation and impediment that we had to increasing affordability in the current 5 World Trade Center. I mean, we fought for 100% affordability and Mark was amazing for supporting us in getting the match. And we were flat told by city and state that it had to be capped at a certain percent because you couldn't actually get the building built if we did more affordable housing. That it makes the rentals that are above that so much more expensive.
I mean, absolutely, feasibility is always a fundamental concern when you're devising programs like this.
Yeah.
We hear a lot like increase the percentage of affordability or drive down AMIs. If you do that past the point of feasibility, then nobody gets anything. I looked at, I heard your concerns as being somewhat different. Where if we're only getting, 20% affordability from our RAP districts. And then the 80% are market rate, aren't we like losing ground or whatever? Because those market rates are gonna be so high. Affordable housing is great. It provides new housing for, folks at limited incomes. Market rate housing is also great for our purposes. Back to the BP's introduction here, where it's the housing shortage. The housing shortage that fundamentally drives the rising rents, the rising housing costs, the gentrification and displacement pressure, the overcrowding, the homelessness. If we are creating even more market rate units on the Upper East Side, that's taking pressure off of the rents on existing housing in the neighborhood, and it's taking pressure off of, Harlem and parts north of Manhattan as well. Where the fact that Upper East Side and Upper West Side some of it is actually shrinking, that puts pressure on other parts of the borough and other parts of the city. So when I see 80-20, I say the affordable housing is awesome, but I like the market rate housing too. It addresses the shortage of housing for people with money in a way that takes pressure off of your neighbors.
Sorry, but you're assuming that market means lower. Market will be higher.
I'm not making any
I
assumptions
know,
about
but
market at
so
all.
I'm not sure how we're driving. I mean, first of all, if you drive the price of the housing up in the neighborhood, okay? I'm just saying, the affordable units, where do these people go to shop? Where do these people do all the things that you still have to do with the amount of money that you have? So this is what I'm trying to wrestle with, and this is what I'm trying to tell the people on my board, if you will, why this is a better plan than what we've been seeing in the neighborhood. I take Mark's point about you can't throw people out, but right across the street from where I live, in 2020, they tore down, 6 walk-ups. Where people got upwards of 7-figure, sums to get out of their apartment. And we've lost all that affordable housing, and I can say that, those are gonna be condo developments, and there's gonna be, I think they're gonna put in, five affordable apartments around the corner from whatever they're gonna develop.
That's the status quo. The status quo is, you could rebuild on a site without any affordability at all.
Right, but they're gonna just do it as of right, that's just what I'm saying, the 20% bonus isn't gonna result in any more.
But there's no way that applying an inclusionary framework across all medium and high density districts results in less affordable housing than you're seeing under the status quo. There's just no way.
But I mean.
And when you talk about new market rate housing, even in the Upper East Side, there's great recent research from the last probably 8 or so years on what is the effect of even new, really expensive market rate housing on rents for the existing housing in an area, the existing market rate housing. And building new market rate housing, even really expensive market rate housing, takes pressure off of the rents in the existing units, and that's really what we care about if we wanna preserve neighborhoods for the people who live there, right?
But Val, what is your solution? You painted a scenario you didn't like, you had a luxury building in your neighborhood, it was 100% market rate. What is your solution to get affordability in that building?
Well, number one, we don't have a lot of rental housing in our entire neighborhood where you have mostly condos and co-ops.
Right.
So it would be some kind of, and this is what we asked for on 94th Street, a commitment from the developer of the building that he would keep most of the apartments there.
Right, so.
No, this wasn't as of right, they needed our permission to go up to the 450 feet or whatever he's gonna build now, but what I'm saying is, at least in this market, where mortgage rates are high, developers are interested in rental housing because they can't sell the apartments. So we were asking for things like commitment to keep the building a rental building for 25 years. Commitment, we're not seeing any of this in the UAP is what I'm saying. So I don't see this as a real incentive to drive affordable housing in our neighborhood, which we have been craving.
Yeah, I mean, relative to the status quo, this does change the calculus for landowners. Like I said, it privileges rentals over condos because it's easier to max out your site. And we do expect some condos at the highest density to participate in UAP anyway.
Well, do you have any statistics, John, that I could share with my board that would show, like, any scenarios where what would this generate in our neighborhood, other than just more rent stabilized and rent controlled housing going down and luxury apartments going up with larger apartments?
And I can also say the UAP would not in any way add incentives to tear down existing housing.
Well, we don't.
Because UAP just says, whatever you have, market rate today, you keep it. If you wanna do anything more than that, it has to be 100% permanently affordable. If you guys succeed and vote down UAP, then you're just gonna see more of the stuff that you're saying that you don't wanna see in the neighborhood. Without the affordability. So,
And sorry, and Samir, did you have something beforehand?
No, it's good.
Okay, I wanna keep the conversation
John,
going.
when you evaluated the rental markets, the market rentals. What kind of review did DCP do? Because I hear what you're saying. We are a neighborhood that has a lot of luxury. It has not brought down the price of the old stock. In fact, the old stock has risen due to the competitiveness for how much more the new stock is. And what we have currently is something that's very well known in the city, where it's like a rack rate hotel rate, where they will tell you that this 2-bedroom apartment is an $8,000 apartment, let's just use that number off the top of my head, but they're offering incentives in some of the older buildings. Sometimes it says, oh, well, we'll give you 2 months free, so your price is lower. But the rack rate, to use a hotel room, stays high. And that is what, for example, the condos are used for the tax basis when they're looking at everything. And we haven't actually seen any of our older stock come down in pricing, even though our older stock has things like the new stock and the new luxury includes electric or includes, water. Any of that in the old stock all the additional costs, the prices are still rising, so an average 2 bedroom in our neighborhood's pretty intense unless you're in a stabilized building. And you can go anywhere from 5,500 to 10,000 on a 2 bedroom, and the oldest stock is not low. There's no, that it's risen almost with every new stock that's come. So I'd love to understand how DCP and the city evaluated the rack rates and the incentive prices, like which ones were you using when you were looking at this? And how that's gonna end up helping. I mean, overall, I think people have heard me say the affordability is an issue because developers don't want affordable housing necessarily to the values of the other housing that they have. The city likes to tax the condos and co-ops based on the market rates of the rentals. So I'm having a hard time feeling where the financial calculations are coming, and maybe I just don't understand it. But I'm not an accountant, but understanding how DCP evaluated that, because we've not seen any of it.
No, we work very closely with HPD, and their feasibility analyses also informed a lot of negotiations at the state level on tax benefits, so they're kind of our. The folks who dig into the transactional details for us. You mentioned rack rate versus like the actual effective rent. I feel like we got great insight into pricing dynamics, like remember the pandemic when people were leaving Manhattan? And the calculus shifted and landlords had to tap dance in order to get tenants into those units. And so what we were seeing
I lived in a building, they made tenants move out for 30 days before they could move to a smaller, so.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not talking
Yeah.
specifically your building,
Yeah.
but what we saw during that weird phase where supply and demand shifted in the city. Is that the needle went from landlords have all the power to like landlords need to tap dance in order to occupy those vacant units. And we did see prices go down. Yes, people are. Landlords are loath to like decrease the nominal prices of rents, but you saw the 2 months for free, the 3 months for free, the free access to amenities, the, signing 2 and 3 year leases.
That's all gone.
Exactly, but it illustrates the fundamental point here. It illustrates the fundamental point here. That when you have more housing, when the supply demand shifts around that the power that landlords have shifts towards tenants a little bit. And so what the research shows, what experience shows from the pandemic as well, is that it's always better to have built that housing than to not build the housing. If you're concerned about rents, if you're concerned about, displacement and gentrification pressures.
Did HPV go by the base number or the incentive price?
They of
Because-
course go by the actual rent. So if someone says the rent's $4,000, but you have 2 months for free, then they're gonna calculate that based on a $40,000 in rent for a year, not 48. So you go on what people are actually paying for the apartment. But I mean, I just wanna emphasize that point. It is basically never good for rents to prevent the housing from being built, which seems to be what you're suggesting there, that new construction somehow raised the rents for existing
It did.
units.
It did.
Yeah, and sorry, I wanna get back to the original conversation that we've been having here, which has been about getting your feedback for these. I know that a few of you have still not had your full board votes, or you're still in committee, you're still getting presentations from TCP. A lot of those questions can be asked at those meetings. I wanna be very cognizant on time, because I know people are gonna have some hard outs pretty soon. So I do wanna go through the rest of these proposals and hear from either recommendations from boards that have already passed, or not maybe litigate the questions and
I just
get
never
through this up.
I'll
So
send you the relevant research.
I have
So
Charles.
mine is on UAP.
Yes, go ahead.
So, I just wanted to ask the borough president, and I know that there are a couple of representatives from our, council folks. Are we looking, I don't think Community Board 10, and I know any of the community boards are not applauding the fact that, Mark, that we absolutely need a comprehensive housing plan. There's no question about it. This is the biggest crisis that any of us as adults and human beings have faced in New York City. Here's the question. We're certainly not trying to throw out UAP. we've raised some points. Is there going to be some kind of movement negotiation as this thing moves through the process to be able to say, hey, okay, so the 60 may not work for everybody, could that become 70? Or, not, the 60 doesn't work, could that become 50 as opposed to 40? Is there gonna be any negotiating? Or is it an all, kind of like take it as it is and, and this is the way it's going, you know?
There already is negotiation and there will be, mostly that's happening right now, I would say, in between the city council.
Yeah.
And DCP, and that doesn't really kick into high gear until the city council vote approaches. But they're listening to feedback here.
Right.
And I think changes are absolutely on the table.
And the only reason I said that, I think it's important to take back, we have hearings, community is raising this. One of the biggest concerns I think everyone has said is that it's been too rushed, there's too much all coming at one time. I mean, some boards are obviously a lot more adept, dealing with this. Some boards have consultants and other, things that are helping them with this. But the community is concerned about timing. It's helpful to go back to be able to say, Mr. Borough President, that, that there will be, negotiations, that there is going to be some kind of movement. Because oftentimes, I know we feel this way at CB10. It's either, their way or the highway. I mean, we're not really feeling like there is that ability to really have our voices heard and appreciated. And it's nice to take that back from a borough board to say that there's a belief from our borough president and others that some of these things we're recommending, could gain some traction. That's all I was really, just asking, because there is also just a question about, from the faith that we have, in this process. We want to say yes, but that we want to be able to be heard as well and feel like we're not just, kind of like a little stepping stone to the end of the overall inevitable process. And yeah, we covered the CVs, but but who cares? I mean, that's, I'm just trying to gain a sentiment to this whole discussion, I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, just wanted to go back to what you were saying, is that we have a number of other proposals, so I think if we could keep going.
Yes.
All right, we will now move on to. Sorry.
Fun too.
We're gonna move on to proposal 6, eliminating parking mandates for new buildings in several parts of the city. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for CB5, we have parking maximums in our district. And that's something that we thoroughly enjoy, so I would expect us to, potentially say that we want parking maximums in more of the city, because we think it's worked great for us.
I'll just read our response to that item. District 7 approves city planning's proposed amendment to remove parking mandates. But parking mandates no longer apply in our district. The proposed amendment will increase the supply of housing citywide, thus reducing rents or dwelling prices in our district while decreasing overall traffic in the city.
Thank you. Jessica?
CB 11 was surprisingly in favor of this. I think because it was more with the building than the parking on the street. There obviously is concerned that, more residents will bring more parking on the street issues, but as everyone knows, East Rome is a reverse commuting district, so parking is very important.
So comment from 10, parking is already, we don't like it. Parking is already a significant challenge in our district. Garage parking is costly. The street parking is limited due to various factors. Thank goodness congestion, pricing has, not brought the, further prices. So eliminating parking will exacerbate these issues. If we look at our projects, the main project that we voted down the last time, which is coming back, is 145. And if you know that area and the density and doing whatever, if you can build 900 units and not have one parking space, which makes it a lot more affordable to build, that would be a disaster for a neighborhood that has one subway, the number 3 train that doesn't even, in fact, come into the full station. It's a half station, you know, and then one bus that goes east and west. So, you know, that, you know, is a concern for CB ten.
Yeah, we were against lifting the parking mandates. Our district is really of the opinion that it was a mistake 40 years ago to get rid of mandated parking in Manhattan, and we don't, you know, that was surprisingly to me, 23-11 vote.
We were also against it. We have a pilot program for the trash containers, which has taken away approximately 8 parking spaces per block. And with congestion pricing, we were afraid, and we already see people coming from Jersey, Westchester, and the Bronx, taking up parking in the area. Cars are, you know, bike rider, I walk, mass transit, but people still use cars. Everyone can't Uber around the city or zip car around the city, so it has to be a balance.
Thank you. Sam?
It's not mandated, but it's still allowed.
Yeah.
Yeah, so my question was, is there a way that DCP looked at in the allowance, doing an encouragement for electric or share vehicles or any kind of incentive? So if it's not a mandated parking, which is just a blanket mandate, that one could actually do an incentive to, if you're gonna put parking in, you can have X benefit to help get the congestion off the streets. And I would also say that would include agency parking, just because I'd like them off my streets. But yeah, that seems to be our concern, is that we have placard parking everywhere. And you know, to tell the residents that you need to take mass transit and to tell the actuarials and accountants that you can take your car seems a little backwards. So I wondered if since parking was not mandated any longer, if there would have been perhaps a look at incentivizing ways to actually improve congestion on the street, even though it's not mandated. You know, you would not be mandated to have parking unless you are incentivized to have electric car parking, more bicycle storage, deliverista storage, you know, other kinds of things. We have a problem in the city where the some of the unions have a guaranteed parking provided for their union members at quote, no cost to the city. But if it's no cost to the city, that means it's congestion on the streets. And I wonder whether DCP could look at something in that, since we're talking about long-term plan of fixing that.
Yeah, for the stuff that happens on zoning lots, which is the stuff that we have jurisdiction over. Carbon neutrality and economic opportunity both created new incentives to do like electric charging stations. In existing off-street parking, removed obstacles to that in a way that encourages a shift towards electric. Housing opportunity does include some initiatives to make parking more of a shared neighborhood resource rather than something that belongs to a particular building. For instance, we're extending the allowances in medium and high density districts that enable buildings to rent out accessory parking that's not needed for residents of that building to other people in a neighborhood in a way that we think could increase access to parking in a way that will be helpful for folks who still have and still use cars. That said, you know, existing residents always can recall a parking space for their own use if it turns out that the building itself needs to use that accessory parking in the future. We have stuff in lower density districts as well to provide more flexibility on locating parking on sites. So even though we're not mandating it, we're making it easier to provide at the same time, consistent with our overall message of like, it's not a war on cars. We're just trying to reduce conflicts between parking and housing that we see on sites, you know, across the city when new housing is being developed.
And also we made the note here too, so.
Thank you.
Yes.
I think it's only fair to point out there are large parts of the city that you cannot live in without a car.
Yep.
And to not take that into account, you can't, people won't live in the housing if they can't have a car. They can't do the most basic of things. So it's I think people, are uncomfortable making a decision about parts of the city that they don't have personal experience, nor have they heard from in terms of what are their experiences. I grew up in a neighborhood, there's no way to get groceries, there's no way to do a lot of basic things without a car. So it's just one, and I'm not a car person, but still, it has to be. You don't want to create housing and where it's not going to be utilized because people can't, have a car.
Yeah, I guess my question for you, John, is if you were a developer and you were gonna build housing that no one would live in because you didn't have parking, why would you build the building?
Yeah, I mean, that's that's the answer to that question. We can look to other jurisdictions that have made this move, everywhere from Buffalo, places in California, Texas. That have eliminated parking mandates. It absolutely does not mean that no parking gets built. Parking does get built. A little farther out, more auto independent parts of the city, we absolutely expect that we'll continue to see parking, especially in lower density parts of the city. Even today, South Brooklyn, Eastern Queens, Eastern Bronx, developers will often build more parking than is required by the zoning today. We think our mandates are way too high today. And still, developers who think it's necessary in order to get people in those units will provide additional parking, and that will continue. Nothing in this text amendment will prevent folks from doing that in the future.
I will also,
Just wanna see, is it a recommendation?
it is a recommendation
Okay.
that parking be linked to size of apartments, and the reason why I say that. Is if you are a family of 5, you cannot take a taxi in New York City, you must take an Uber because you can't fit. If you are, yes, you can take mass transit everywhere sometimes, but if you're. Having been the person with the double stroller and a single stroller going places, you don't fit in cabs, so can't afford an Uber. I think that when you're looking at parking, if it's the buildings with larger apartments that support families would be more. Beneficial to have parking versus buildings that have mostly singles and studios, not to be obnoxious to anybody who doesn't have a family, but when you're looking at size, resources and abilities.
And mobility, people with mobility issues who
And
must have a
mobility.
car.
Alex, do you have a recommendation?
Well, I was just gonna, anything that has senior housing or, people with disabilities.
And sorry, the recommendation is that they have to have parking? I'm not sure, I'm
Well,
not
I
clear what
mean,
you're saying.
If it's a project that's, assisted living or.
You mandate they have parking.
Yeah.
Maintain a man.
And not only just for the people who live there, because if you have caretakers, a lot of people in the other boroughs, very hard to get caretakers because of the amount of time it takes to get from Brooklyn to Queens on public transportation. It's a really long time. I mean, just from my own personal experience, trying to find somebody to take care of my mother. We were very limited in who could take care of her because there wasn't enough parking where she lived for the person to come from. And it would take 2 hours each way from Brooklyn to get to where my mother lived.
Do we need to vote on that, or we're just gonna recommend it?
Well, I was just something that people looked at in terms of options.
Yeah, I mean, we eliminated parking for like senior affordable housing back in 2016 DQA. Because analysis showed that if you live in senior affordable housing, you don't have a car, like 0%. Yeah.
So, I know, but
They're too large.
people have to take care of them too, it's not like,
We'll move on to proposal 7. This is proposal 7 will facilitate the conversion of commercial building to a residential use. Samir?
Yeah, I think, this is very important for CB5, we have the Midtown South mixed use plan that's coming. And we have been very excited about office to residential conversions, because it means that we can get new housing without new buildings.
Thank you. Everyone?
We approved this in CD7. But also thought that it would be possible for DCP to change the 20, the cutoff into a greater than 35 years, just to essentially avoid having to to revisit this. In 5 years' time.
Anyone else? Oh,
Oh, and that any increase in FAR be applicable to you.
Yeah, I think community board 11 stance was that any proposal that eliminated CB 11 or city council approval, that we would want to bring it back, and that would apply. We would want there to be an ability to review these kinds of conversions, and also to require some level of affordability.
Yes, John, can you talk to the state level tax abatement?
Yes, so one of the wonderful surprises, I don't know if you can call it that, it was one of the things that we most strongly advocated for. Was a state level tax abatement to provide for affordable housing and conversions for the first time in New York City history. As Tammy and CB1 knows, you can have enormous amounts of conversions like happened in the 1990s and the OOs there, with not a single unit of affordable housing. Everybody saw that as a problem. On the other hand, the Office Conversion Task Force, sponsored by Camp Council and staffed by folks from across the agencies and practitioners, found that, just mandating affordability and conversions basically rendered zero feasibility. Existing office stock, only a single digit percentage are really, candidates for conversion. If you require affordability as well, that goes to zero. So that's why we're ecstatic that there is a state level tax benefit that requires 25% affordable at 80%, an average of 80% AMI with a tranche at 40% as well, so that you're getting a range of incomes. HPD worked on the feasibility analysis for this as well, and we've gotten a lot of interest even from projects that are in process already in using the tax benefit to support affordable housing and conversions, and so we're very hopeful about that.
I have a lot to say, but I'll wait till next month because we have so many commercial properties.
Okay.
We've had developers talk to us about affordable housing and still weighing the feedback they gave us with our presentation. I'd say we are no longer the central business district by my, if you want to take a look at how much housing we now have, and the potential conversions along and how they work with our text amendments and our POPs. That is a really strong concern.
Thank you. We're ready to move on to the next one?
Yes.
Alright, moving into proposal 8, which will remove zoning restrictions that disallow alternative housing types such as small micro units and shared housing. Should have comments or, yeah.
CB 11 did not support this measure. As I mentioned at the beginning, I think we may have made different decisions if the small and shared were separated. We recently had a CB intern who analyzed the housing stock changes in our neighborhood over the course of the last 5 to 10 years and found that a lot of our family sized apartments were broken up into single occupancy units, and almost a heavy percentage of the new developments have been almost exclusively studio and 1 bedrooms. And I think excuse me, I heard DCP say that, and actually this is my story. I came to East Harlem as a roommate situation with 4 people that I really love, and we wanted to live together. The assertion that the 1 bedroom and studios are what is in the highest demand, I think is an error. I think that, people don't, especially seniors, like they may want their own space, but there's concerns about, lack of social cohesion. And, if people want to live together in a larger size unit, I would say that the demand for those units is greater. And that, of course, families want larger size units, but saying that people only want studio and 1 bedrooms, I think is not true. That's almost what's only being provided. So that's where people end up, not because they want to be there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think the suggestion we have on the draft is a great one. About only allowing new construction and office residential conversions to have 100% small units. I think there are a lot of concerns around taking existing units and splitting them up, and I think that this addresses that.
Stay tuned for HPD's shared housing roadmap coming up that will address exactly that issue.
So can you,
We
just a clarification?
we approved this in large part because we had some residents of our district present at one of our hearings. Young people anxious to stay on the west side and unable to find living arrangements on their own, who really basically said this would be a lifeline for them. And it was very moving.
Great, thank you. Valerie?
So just a clarification, are you saying what Samir is saying, that this is only applicable to new construction?
The shared housing roadmap that HPD will provide will include recommendations for restrictions, not in the zoning, but the housing maintenance code. Any shared housing would be new construction or conversion only. And any conversions would require discretionary approvals. So we've heard these comments and HPD plans to lay out their plan for this type of housing, I think later this month.
So it's two separate, so they're not coordinated. The zoning would permit it, but the zoning would permit the conversion, but it would be dependent upon HPD to decide whether that's actually enforced or not.
It would, yeah, the requirements would be in the housing maintenance code. There are a number of components here, like ADUs, like small and shared housing, where we have to work in concert with other bodies of law that regulate those things. And so this is one of those instances.
Thank you.
I mean, I think working with. The one thing that because I think there's a lot of opportunity here, and I've heard positive things about it. Safety. You know, and it's like these only work if people feel safe. When they have to share basic, you know, access to basic functions like kitchens and bathrooms. So it's, you know, people, we just don't want to see, you know, a good thing turn into a disaster.
Tim?
So Tom, just to be clear, none of this works for existing housing. And none of this, it's applicable to new conversions. Is there a possibility that someone, I'm just like a little confused with the city of yes from the last one, that you can convert where it was converting, let's say residential floors into business, right, business, commercial, to make more mixed use buildings. If you have a building that converts 2 floors into retail, commercial, and that doesn't tend to work, and they convert those 2 floors back, is that considered a conversion? Because it's a partial of the building that was allowed under the first.
So you went from residential to commercial and then back
In
to
part of the
residential?
building, and it's not working, we don't have a commercial market that's very viable right now, so they're gonna convert back. Does that then trigger this?
I'm not sure. I'd have to talk to HPD about that very specific situation.
Yeah, because I'm trying to relate the two city of yes, things that we've gone through. And then when HPD brings out their rules, I assume that'll be a rule change that comes out, yes?
So there is some rulemaking authority for HPD contained in these proposals, like around administrative provisions for UAP, around some things for small and shared, but also actual changes to the housing maintenance code that would require cooperation with council, city council in order to enact.
So the goal is DCP, we do the zoning change, and then HPD comes back and they do a rule change.
Or advocate for a change to the housing maintenance code, which is the ad code, which is beyond rules, it's actual change to the law. So for instance, we can remove obstacles to non-regulatory agreement shared housing in the zoning. But the ban on, non-regulatory agreement shared housing remains in the housing maintenance code.
Right.
So in order to enable non-regulatory agreement shared housing, it requires changes to other bodies of law as well. So it's one example of changes that are making to the zoning that would require complementary changes to other bodies of law in order to, fully be implemented.
Is there a guarantee that the public has that both of those would happen?
No, of course. I mean, if it's a separate public review process and a separate legislative process as well. So say for instance that people love the idea of shared housing for regulatory agreement projects, that's 100% affordable projects. HPD's been working on this since for like 5 years, people love that. Then we can enable that through the zoning and through HPD rulemaking. If they don't love the idea of non-regulatory agreement shared housing, then and the HMC changes don't pass, then it won't be allowed.
Do you have any understanding of HPD's timeline?
The shared housing roadmap, I expect very shortly. But I don't, I'll have to check with them on exact dates.
And their stuff cannot be ripe until you do the zoning first. Is that, do I understand that?
Both changes would be necessary. Yeah.
Right, but zoning text has to come before theirs.
I don't think that there's any necessity for one to be before the other, it's just that if you do one but not the other, then it's not.
Absolutely,
All right.
absolutely.
Does anybody have any other comment or we'll move on? Alright, we'll move on to proposal 9, facilitating infill development on residential campuses and properties owned by religious institutions.
And so Tim poses, here's the comment from land use. CB10 has many eligible campuses, including the various NYCHA developments, Lennox Terrace, Esmeralda Garden, for example, and the site previously designated for the 145 project. It is recommended, however, that any new development shall have a requirement that includes 50% of the units to be permanently affordable.
Thank you. Sandy?
We had concerns about this, specifically for Stuyvesant Town. And it was noted that the existing roads would need to be remapped to become city maps, but our understanding is it's actually a BSA, issue, and that since the roads right now are used by the fire department, et cetera, that it would be very easy for them to say these roads qualify. And I guess that's just one example of how that could be done.
Absolutely, we went to the BSA, we went to DOB on this, 100%. BSA would require the mapping of those streets in order to render interior sites developable.
They have not in the past.
That there have been some differences back in the 1990s in Staten Island and stuff like that. But we are 100% solid on that answer for you. We talked to law, we talked to BSA, we talked to DOB because of that issue, and so despite what you might be hearing otherwise, 100% answer, yes.
Beverly and then.
Well, we had a page and a half in our resolution about this, and I'll spare you most of it. I think the real concern was how it addresses the unique needs and concerns of NYCHA residents, particularly in our district. So easing restrictions, preventing infill is critical, but it's not okay if we don't have buy-in from impacted communities. And opportunity for input, both from tenants and from community board, needs to be included as in order to make sure any of these things work.
Can I respond to that briefly?
Yeah, please.
Those are great concerns. And so we talked with NYCHA about them, both the head of strategic planning, the head of real estate, and also the CCOP, the Citywide Council on Presidents, to talk to some of the resident feedback structure as well. So NYCHA, the progress that they have made in recent years on addressing some of their issues, the capital backlog issues, have been 100% dependent on 2 things. One, any infill that they do and have done over the last 10 years has been 100% affordable. And nothing happens, whether it's public housing trust, whether it's RAD Pact, or whether it's infill, without feedback and outright approval from tenants now. And so we got that solid answer from them on that, which gives us the comfort that we would need to want to support them in their efforts going forward as part of their ongoing attempts to deal with capital backlog issues. And when it comes to infill on NYCHA campuses in particular, they have the development rights today, they have the space. Unfortunately, bad zoning forces them, if they wanna use those development rights, to do the height factor, non-contextual, tall skinny stuff that makes everybody's heads explode. You know, think about 200 Amsterdam and CD7, that's our fault, that is our fault, it's the bad zoning. We forced that with 1961 zoning. And so what the way that I would describe the core concerns of our infill proposals is to say, we don't wanna force you to do tall skinny height factor, if and when infill happens, we want you to be able to do modern, height limited, contextual infill instead of. You know, what you see today. And so when, you know, you look at Washington houses, for instance, they have an as of right crazy height factor ability today. We don't like that, we know that nobody on the campus likes it, nobody in the neighborhood likes it. We wanna enable, if and when infill happens, that it can be contemporary, height limited, contextual infill, which if it's on a NYCHA campus is gonna be 100% affordable only with tenant approval. So I just wanted to provide that background and context.
Yeah,
I mean, I just don't understand if that's all with approval, why do we have to change this? Because it could come to the community board and it can come for approval tomorrow with all these constituent and stakeholder groups present to make a decision. This makes, at least, I think, the tenants in who live on these campuses very nervous that this is gonna have a detrimental effect on the existing residents. So why is this necessary then? With all those things you just said, why do we need this?
Oh, the zoning text today mandates the tall, skinny, non-contextual stuff. The text itself is an obstacle. It prevents, you know, contemporary, height limited infill. Such that today, NYCHA has to go through mayoral zoning overrides if they wanna do, you know, a contextual 100% senior affordable on an empty parking lot. And so what we wanna do is, without touching the tenant approval processes. Just eliminate some of the zoning obstacles in order to save NYCHA time and money on that end. They still need to get the tenant approval, some of which is enshrined in actual state law now, the necessity to go to get tenant approval for some of these things. So we just wanna save NYCHA time and money to do the things that we think are beneficial for campus residents and for the neighborhood. One more thing, on the 100% affordable infill. They've said that the way that the tenants have bought into that infill is because a certain percentage of those new apartments, typically 25%. Might be reserved for a senior who's an empty nester in a 3-bedroom, you know, apartment in existing public housing. If they can move into new senior affordable housing, then that frees up a 3-bedroom for somebody who's been on the waiting list for however many years, and so we see that as a big win.
I have just a really quick question to clarify. The zoning text will change to require the 100% affordability in the infill?
No, that's NYCHA requirement. So because today they have the development rights, no affordability restrictions. They have the footprint, the ability to do as of right, you know, height factor development. We can't really impose affordability requirements on that. That would be like taking something away from NYCHA, which is not the greatest idea given the array of problems that they face. We would just say that if and when infill happens, it can be buildings that are contextual, that fit in with the neighborhood much better than the types of things we've seen in like CB7 or, you know, in CB3, there's the Seward Park infill, you know, people are not super pumped about that building as well. Again, it's an instance where bad zoning forced them to build that form. It's not the developer's fault, it's like my fault. And so we're trying to change the zoning text to make for better buildings.
Yeah, Jessica.
CB11 did not support this. As we know, we probably have the highest concentration of NYCHA buildings. We also have heat and resilience problems when it comes to flooding, and some of these NYCHA campuses are our only line of defense to combat those issues. We agree with CB 10 and 7 that affordability is a concern and that input from the tenants is absolutely critical. But I think, you know, NYCHA shouldn't have to force, you know, this development of their land to get the needed improvements to their units.
We're against the proposals.
Anybody else?
Now, if I have to go, I just want to let you know, CB10 was yes on all the remainder.
I think we have this listed out as 9 proposals with some additional comments. Everyone has a copy to review, but this has been very helpful for us.
The checklist that DCP gave us, I think was 15, right, John?
Golly, I know there's a bit.
Yeah,
Yes.
15.
Can we match our borough board resolution to the 15 check boxes that DCP has, so we can try and cross-reference all the way across for all the boards?
Yeah, it sounds like that's doable,
Thank you.
What about the tower to base thing? That's not really in the checklist.
Gotcha. Yeah, the tower on a base regulations would provide a little bit more room in the base. And a little bit more lot coverage in a graduated way above that, in a way that would lead to shorter buildings at a given FAR. So we see that the base often doesn't match the context that it's situated in. We see that some of the lot coverage maximums have made it impossible for those buildings to echo some of the forms from previous eras and actually drive heights higher. So given that the point of tower on a base is to, effectively, not in a hard way, but restrict heights of buildings, we think these will be beneficial from a context perspective, but also from a concern around overall heights perspective as well. So that's what's going on there.
Just one note before we move on from this, just want to make sure. Teams on laptops here, we're taking notes of everything that's been shared. And just the way that we shared a draft of this, just as we said, we'll update it. We're also gonna update it with the comments and recommendations that we have here as well. So we'll be sending that out ahead of discussion. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Sorry, Gary, we don't have a date for this
We
budget?
don't have yet, I think we said that we'll pass around a couple of days
Okay.
and figure out what makes the most sense for everyone.
And I want to say we've been answering CD questions all day, every day. If you have any additional questions at all, just send them our way. We're very happy to provide. Straightforward answers to all your questions to inform your consideration of these proposals.
Yeah, and from the email that I sent at the end of last week, I did share the most recent FAQ as well as the memo from boards 9 through 12. So you have a lot of information and questions that have already been asked there too.
I do wanna say thank you, Eric, because this dialogue with DCP was probably the best one.
Yes.
Because being able to hear, we all have a mandated role to vote for our own boards, that is what the city charter says. But hearing everybody else around the table understand how the contextuality of the discussions work in their buildings actually, and in their neighborhoods helps you understand, well, wait a minute, I have a building like what Samir was talking about, I have a building like what Susan was talking about, I have a building like this. So all of that actually helps, I think, bring it closer. And I would hope that in future things like this, actually we do this discussion and then like the path is today. Cause I learned a lot.
I concur, yeah,
I
me
learned a
too,
lot.
Appreciate it.
yeah, absolutely.
I will move into chair reports now, if folks want to keep it brief. Or I will take a motion to.
I'll make you a motion.
We can take a motion to hold off on reports. I think. Taking a. Well, hold on one second. Before we do so, I will pass it to Samir.
Yeah, I think, I'm just really quickly, CD5, the only thing I have to report, I have a lot of stuff, but I'll skip the others. Is that we had elections, so I will no longer be the chair as of July 1st. So there'll be a new person.
No, but
We barely got to it.
We have a new person in a month, so.
I thought somebody else happened since you were here. I
Oh,
thought.
no, I'm just, our terms run until July 1st, so.
Well, thank you, it was lovely meeting you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just really quick from CD11, we're having trouble still with the DSNY sanitation garage. We spoke about the points of agreement from our 2017 rezoning. We had requested that IBO do a report for us about the commitment, and it was stated that they don't need to provide the dual district sanitation garage that was promised because they did not find a site that was deemed viable. But we recently had a presentation from Parks, right next to a site that we had explored in the CAD that was deemed not viable by the DSNY. But Parks is using it for all the same size of vehicles, types of access into Manhattan on Randall's Island. And so we're, you know, I think it relates to CV10, but you know, we're gonna push that issue again and hope that the city agencies can work together to come to a solution for us.
And I have two very quick items. We have two ULIP applications coming before us by the EDC, and they're based on our 197A plan, which was done in 2008. And it's a big mistake because there's no housing being called for, because in our 197A, we said it was a hospital corridor. And times have changed, so they keep coming back and saying, well, it's what you asked for. So they're the two biggest pieces of public land city-owned land in our district, and no housing. So it's just a word of caution to other boards. And the other thing is we're presenting our FDR study that we did, hopefully to some of our neighbors. And hopefully people will be excited about it. Thank you.
I'm gonna be 3. 1, we welcome CV6 to come and talk to us. 2, we are not signing on to that joint congestion pricing letter that's been bandied around. We will be having our own because the letter, as it currently stands, does not match the positions of CV1. So we'll be discussing it in July at our transportation committee and voting on whether to sign on or to create our own letter and to comment back on the pause in congestion pricing, because we definitely will comment. I wanted to clear that up. And the third thing and only thing is we got notification that there will be a safe haven opening on a building that's attached to a school in CV1 with the front door at a bus stop, so there is no place for any of the medical vans without taking away the school's play street, and its front entrance to the safe haven will be less than 25 feet from the front, from a viable used entrance to the school. So the school's not very happy about it, that we just got notification, the PTA and the schools are closed for the summer. And DSS is claiming that it will open early fall, but that'll be without any ability to engage with the large community that it's attached to. So we're unsupportive of a safe haven at that location. We'd love to support a family shelter there, a women's shelter there, something that actually would work well with the community support. That is a school that supports several migrant shelters as it is. So we have the resources and we are well situated to support a family shelter at that location.
Just pick out 2 things. We passed a resolution Tuesday approving the 8th iteration and visit to us about the dock house at the 79th Street Marina. Very controversial because of its size, and Parks and EDC have promised to come back before design is complete to continue to work on the specifics. Secondly, as I was sitting here, we got the application for a P card sent to us with the great assistance of the Borough
I'm so jealous.
President's office. I think we figured out a way to get through. If we did it, then perhaps it can open up to the rest of you who've had the same problem for the last 2 years.
Yes.
To get a P card, just to get a P card.
Oh, so that we can use our own funds instead of having to use personal funds.
So we have the application, they say we fill it out, it's 5 weeks, and so we'll get a little bit of.
How did you
Hopefully,
get the application?
we got some heavy hitters to
Yeah, we were able to help
apply
with
for
that. We can
us.
help with CB2 or anyone else.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, big Borough President's office.
Okay, my one item is, I know you were all planning to come to our art fair on Saturday, but we're canceling it due to the heat. So we're rescheduling it for September 21st, so you have some time to put it on your calendar, but we just felt that we just too much for our volunteers as well as our exhibitors and drive back potential purchasers, so we're rescheduling, that's all I have.
All right, so with that, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
I'll motion.
Second.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you.